Okay, so thank you everyone for joining us today. I would like to get started, and we're just going to get started as we wait for more participants to join us. And my name is Hezron Munyakin, and I'm going to be the moderator for the session today. So just before we get started, I'd like to share a few ground rules, and that's please ensure that your microphones are switched off during the session to prevent interruption. And also please note your concerns and questions on the chat box so that they'll be responded to at the end of the session. So I'd just like to invite Dr. David Odhiambo, who's going to take us through the topic for today, which is medical research on focus on clinical trials. Welcome, David.
Thank you so much, Hezron. Thank you so much, Hezron. It's a pleasure to be here back again. And for our participants, thank you for joining in. Thank you for being part of our discussions. I hope it's a matter of us learning together and trying on finding better ways to improve our healthcare systems. So as already has been introduced, I'm Odhiambo David. I'm a pharmacist by profession, and I work with Agriculture, Health and Social Innovation, which is a social enterprise. We are committed to improving access to quality care through education, capacity building, and pharmaceutical system strengthening. So based on our focus topic for today, we're looking at medical research and with a focus on clinical trials. So in this context, it's very important that we get background information from you as our participants. Maybe you could just give us an introduction on what you think our focus would be, or something that you know about medical research and clinical trials. That would do for us. You can type on the chat box, or you can unmute your mic and say a word. So we have Thomas, we have Yasmin, and we have Cordero Edmond. Anyone who has something to share on the same? Or what your expectation for the session would be? Yes, Thomas. Well, okay. If there's none coming to speak out or even type, you could just get to type them. Even those people who are following on Facebook Live, we'll be waiting for those comments, then we'll incorporate them in our discussion as we move forward. So the reason as to why this is a very important topic for us as agriculture, and also as a society, as members of the healthcare fraternities, because in everything that we do in our access to healthcare services, starting from medicines that we use, the different medical technologies, healthcare products and all, there is research that comes behind it. And this research is influenced by the science bit. Because for you, for example, if you have a headache and you have to use paracetamol or Panadol, then it has to be effective for your management. It has to have an ability to make the headache subside. And that is the one important thing about it. So how do we determine that? Determine that paracetamol will enable you get better from the headache. How do we guarantee that when you use paracetamol, it won't have adverse effects or side effects on you that are very severe that might make you feel bad about it? So those are very important components in terms of the medical research. So when you have to realize that every product, every healthcare product and technology, medicines, anything, even the reagent that we're using now for testing COVID-19, they are designed from research work. And that research work will determine whether they are effective, they are safe for the patient or the person going to use them. And that will guide in terms of how many people can we use it on. And even now in the outset of COVID-19, we've had so many people talking about some drugs not working, some working better. So with that, you realize in that case, what happens is that so many of us how do we put it? There are so many drugs that are being brought into the discussion, and these drugs that are being brought into the discussion, into the front line in terms of being used to manage COVID-19, there has to be scientific evidence of efficacy, meaning they're able to treat or relieve the symptoms of COVID-19, because we all know COVID-19 doesn't have a cure. So why do we have to look at it in this context? Earlier on, when we had the first case of COVID-19 being reported in Kenya, that was on 13th of March. That was the first case. And following that, there has been moves by every other organizations, every other individuals to work towards ramping up research and coordination of determining an effective cure or a vaccine for COVID-19. On the background of that, we had two scientists from France who had made a claim that they would focus on having the trials being done in Africa. Their justification was that Africans being in Africa, in a resource-constrained setting, we were at more risk of suffering the consequences of this pandemic, and therefore, doing the trials in Africa would ensure the most vulnerable people were catered for. That is the argument that it presented. However, on the backdrop of the very thing, most of us as Africans, as individuals, we were against that, and we felt like we were being used as guinea pigs, we were being used as test subjects for something that isn't safe. It's like we are lesser human beings, which is valid. If such a claim would be made on that ground, it's a valid point. But the question that we need to ask ourselves is, to what extent and what guidelines will be adopted in this research if it's supposed to be done with Africans? And beyond that, is it a necessity or not? And those are very, very important points. So one of the things that we need to realize at start is medical research has different purposes or objectives behind it. And this starts from one, improving knowledge, that is medical and scientific knowledge. So for every intervention, for every effort that we are making towards improving access to care, any research that we do, it can be either intervention-based, where we are giving you a product, or just observing and everything. So intervention or observatory, that's a clinical study. Then the clinical trials as the ones that we're going to look into are, there is an intervention in a clinical setting, or if not a clinical setting, there is a clinician or a doctor who is involved, a healthcare practitioner, that will determine the extent to which an intervention has to be put in place, and beyond which there has to be a break. We don't want to compromise on the quality of care or the kind of research that we're doing and affecting the patient or the patient subject that we're having in that study. So those are very important things that we look at. So one, the medical knowledge or the background of the scientific knowledge that is being advanced. That is one. Two, after advancing scientific and medical knowledge, the other thing is to ensure we improve healthcare and access to healthcare services. Probably the knowledge might not increase as much, but definitely most of them improve in the process. So in this case, we are looking at it in terms of improving healthcare access. If people are developing new diseases, then it means that research that we're doing should be driven towards ensuring we have access to products in the market. And these products that we are having access to in the market are able to improve our well-being. And that is where we have self-care products, we have contraceptive materials that are coming in. There's knowledge that's coming in, and other than the knowledge, we are able to avoid unwanted health complications and unwanted outcomes of our livelihoods. For example, having unprotected sex has a risk of getting pregnancies that are unwanted, contracting infections and all. Because of these advances in research, we are able to improve our health status as individuals. For example, people dealing with non-communicable diseases now, diabetes, hypertension and all. Any research that is being done is to ensure they can access their medicines, which are cheaper in that context. And if not only cheap, they're able to give them the best control of their condition. And that is ideal. So that is where we are driving, improving health outcomes and advancing science. And other than that, we are looking at it in terms of what would be the economic implication of all these. So the basics, knowledge, improving health, and then we move to the other subsidiary factors in terms of the economic development of a country. They'll be backed with proper research, proper economic development, because even now when we're talking about pharmaceutical products, medicines, they have to be sold and the selling of them brings in money. But they can't be done if there was no focus on treating a medical condition or improving science, so that in case there's something that happens in the future, we'll have a way of addressing it. And in that context, you can imagine the current case where we have the initial genome sequence of COVID-19 was determined because of the previous studies that were done on SARS 2013. So this is advancement of science. So those are the very critical principles that you have to acknowledge. Any research should be focused on improving scientific knowledge or medical knowledge. And other than that, improving the health access to healthcare services for the general public and individuals who might be at risk of getting complications from that. So looking at that, we now move to our clinical trials. Are clinical trials necessary or not? That's a very important question that we need to ask ourselves, whether they're necessary or they're not. In this context, as I mentioned, clinical trials, either within a clinical setting or done under the care of a well-qualified healthcare practitioners. And before a clinical trial can be done, it has to be approved. It has to be approved by the regulatory authorities. It has to outline the different frameworks that will enable that clinical trial to be conducted in that country. For example, in the current outset of COVID-19, in the country, clinical trials are approved, are guided by the clinical trials guideline by Pharmacy and Poisons Board. Because it's the Pharmacy and Poisons Board and the research organization that we have, KEMRI, Kenya Medical Research Institute, they collaborate. This is a research arm and this is a regulator of pharmaceutical products that are majorly used in these trials. So how do we ensure that any adverse effects, any problem that might be encountered with use of these pharmaceutical products or even healthcare related technologies and products will be reported and intervention taken to cater for their needs? And at the very same time, we look at it in terms of what would be the implication of these patients in terms of their management? Do we improve access to care for them? That is in terms of the research now. How do we ensure that the welfare of the patients, if you come and you're being managed for a clinical condition, we need the right setting where we know if there's a complication that develops, you'll get the right remedy. There's a follow-up mechanism. Do you have insurance protocols in terms of how you're being managed? Do you have guidance in terms of how to report an adverse event that develops? And that is now through the research center, where I've talked about KEMRI. There's a number of other research centers in the country, but they have to be approved and they have to have the requisite number of qualified professionals who are able to offer that service. So those are very, very important things that we have to acknowledge. There are regulations and policies that are behind approval of clinical trials to be done. Then, when we move beyond the regulatory requirement and having to ensure that we have the right people in place, what comes of us as individuals? How do we get engaged? And what other assurances might we have to prove that us getting into such trials will be safe for us? They're safe for us because earlier on, in the 1940s, there was the Tuskegee Experiment that was done by the Jews. Actually, it was in Germany. And in this research that was being done, it didn't abide by any protocols, and people were not being treated for syphilis, which had a cure at that very moment. So because of these violations of human rights and everything, there was a declaration that was made. It's called the Helsinki Declaration. The World Medical Association is behind that, and WHO. So with the establishment of the Helsinki Declaration, there were key principles that would ensure that there's no harm that would ever come to an individual who is a participant in a clinical trial or any form of medical research that involves human subjects. And this is something that has to be abided by, and that is when even I was talking about the regulation by the Pharmacy and Poisons Board, regulations that they come in with the guidelines from the Kenya Medical Research Institute and related. It's a matter of ensuring that we have a framework, and this framework looks out for our interest in advancing science and medical knowledge. And at the same time, the individuals are human beings with rights and privileges that have to be respected. They have to be upheld. So how do we uphold these rights and privileges? By ensuring there are proper guidelines. Like one, before you take part in a clinical trial, you have to give informed consent. If you're someone over the age of 18, the legal age to make a particular binding agreement with someone, a binding contract. So over 18, you have a consent. Anybody who is less than 18 years of age, these are people who there is assent instead of consent. In assent, there's someone who has the responsibility to make that decision on your behalf. Majorly, it's normally the caregiver or somebody who is in the position of care who has been given the responsibility to look out for that person. Family members, a parent, or probably a medical doctor who has been taking care of that patient in that condition, and they're not able to do that. That is for underage. It also applies for individuals who are elderly and are not in the right state of mind. And that is where now your state of sanity will determine whether you are able to make an informed decision or not. And in terms of the informed consent, we look at it in terms of, are you being told about the risks involved in that research that you're being participating as a subject? Other than that, what are the potential benefits? In case something wrong happens, let's say you face some of the risks, what is the compensation measures that are put in place? If I'm being injected by a particular drug that hasn't been proven in the market, then it means in case of any adverse drug events, I should be able to be taken to a hospital to get the necessary treatment and management so that I get better. So is that provided for? So that I agree to something that I totally understand. If it's going to be catered for, well and good. If it's not going to be catered for and I'm still in for it, then it means I've agreed knowing the terms of engagement. And that is a very, very important bit of it. So all that scoping starts with you having an informed consent and agreeing to be part of that study. It therefore means, even with the claims that were coming around that we are going to be used as guinea pigs and everything, it's not that something that had happened if you're not willing to be part of the study. So you have to be willing to be part of the study before you can be enlisted and enrolled into it as a participant. So that's a very important bit as well. Then another key principle is, for any scientific research, as I mentioned, the key guiding pillars is in terms of improving medical knowledge and advancing access to care and quality care to individuals. So we need to ask, what is the benefit of that study? If the benefits outweigh the risks, then it's something that is worth pursuing. We can't do a study just for the sake of doing it. Let's say, for example, we have drug A and there's a drug B in the market that is already managing people, which is cost effective and cheaper. And then because we just want to advance medical knowledge, we bring in drug A, which has no proven efficacy and has higher risk of affecting the quality of lives of individuals. Then that doesn't meet the criteria for beneficence. And therefore, if there's lesser benefit from using that product or trying it on patients, then it has to be benched. It can't move into the processing of the clinical trial. And those are other critical principles. Then the principle of fairness. The people who are being enlisted into a clinical trial, there has to be fairness in bringing them on board, rather than the bias or the kind of impartiality. There's need for impartiality, that is the fairness and the justice, rather than choosing people because of either preference. If we realize that a drug might have benefit to them, then individuals might get to a point of recommending that somebody close to them or somebody they want to favor derives the benefit by being enlisted into the trial. And in other case, you find another person who is legitimately supposed to be in the trial being exempted. That is not right. That is the principle of justice and fairness in clinical trials. In other circumstances, you find a particular chemical entity that whose safety has not been determined, because before we go to trials in human beings, there are trials that are done on other animals that are being used in trials, for example, the guinea pigs and all that. So is there evidence that it's safer for use in patients? Some of the cases might happen where a product is not safe for the general public, for a human being, but because we are not fair, we feel like they're less of a human being, then we enlist them into research and inject them with these chemical products and medicines. That is not abiding by the principles. So that has to be looked into, and that is where we have the Helsinki Declaration and the principles that are in place. So another thing is not causing harm, benefit has to be there, the impartiality, that is fairness and justice. Then the key principle that guides the physician or the lead researcher is ensuring that the welfare of the patient is taken into account. At the end of the day, anything to do with health is ensuring the benefits that are derived by the patient or the person receiving that care. So are you offering care that is compromising on their well-being, or are you offering care that is upholding their well-being? It has to always uphold their well-being. And other components of the principle, that most of them revolve around ensuring the well-being of the patient, improving access to knowledge and medical services, and ensuring everybody is protected. So those are some of the very critical principles. You have the chance to go read about them, the Helsinki Declaration, the principles that are incorporated, and how we have to look out for every other individual within the healthcare space to ensure that we are not affected. And that even puts the responsibility among us as individuals. If I'm willing to be a participant in a research trial, then I have to be in a position to be able to accept that I'll seek more information about it and know whether it's right for me or not, so that I make an informed decision whether to be part of it or not to be part of it. Another very important. And other than that, I have the liberty and the authority to ask questions about that trial that is being done. Those are very, very important things. And those are some of the principles that have to be upheld by every individual. So, well, when we move to the clinical trials bit, clinical trials, as I mentioned, clinical setting ordered by a physician or a healthcare worker who is approved under the regulations to be able to conduct such kind of studies. And in that case, there are different phases of the clinical trials. One, before we get to the clinical trials where an individual is being used as a subject or a patient that is being used as in that study, there are the preclinical studies that are done. These will use machines and all that, modeling. It uses lab rats and all that I was mentioned. Then we finally move to the patient. In the patient's category, we have 4 phases of the clinical trials. Phase 1 of clinical trials, healthy volunteers, depending on the kind of drug that we are testing. If it is a drug that doesn't have much of side effects in the general public, then it is recommended. Anti-cancer drugs which are already toxic enough cannot be tested on a healthy individuals. So the category of drugs that are being used, the nature of the condition being managed will determine whether we are going to use that drug in a phase 1 trial with patients with individuals who are healthy or who are sick. Very important. So that is the first phase of the clinical trial, phase 1, and it's majorly to determine the dosage range that can be used. For example, normally we use paracetamol. The tablet is 500 milligrams. For adults, it's 1 gram. So we use 2 tablets of that. So the question that we need to ask is, at what point is it safe for you that it helps you get better if you are sick, and at the same time there are no adverse or the side effects that are being developed which are serious for you? So that is the first thing. Other than determining the dose range, we look at the safety. If it causes any adverse events in this healthy individual, then it means the consequences would be terrible in a person who is already sick. So we stop it at that phase 1. If a drug passes phase 1, majorly these people are normally a small group in phase 1, up to 50 people only. Then we move to phase 2, which in phase 2, we are looking at the clinical efficacy of the drug. Does it improve the condition of the patient? For example, now with COVID-19, there are different drugs that have been tested. And they've been tested, and we're looking at it in terms of if someone has a compromise or difficulty in breathing, then how do we use these drugs to improve their outcomes? Can it help them have an open airway? Can it improve their oxygen saturation in blood? If it does, then that is phase 2. It's showing that there's clinical efficacy and benefit that is derived from that drug. Then 2, we also look at the safety profile and even the metabolism profile, a little bit of it, in terms of is it being cleared from your body enough? And that will help us knowing that if you are taking it, you can take it once a day or twice a day so that it doesn't accumulate to a higher concentration in your body as an individual. That is phase 2. And in that group, we have a larger patient population, more than phase 1, but less than phase 3. It's between 300 to 500 individuals. And these are people who are sick. Phase 1, we said these people can be sick depending on the category, or they can be healthy individuals who are being used for a trial to test a drug that doesn't have as much of side effects to the patient population. Then we move to phase 3. Phase 3 is confirmatory. Initially, the drug has passed phase 2, and we've seen that it's able to treat the patient group. If it's able to treat the patient group, then it means it has got benefit in treatment of that patient condition. And therefore, we are going to confirm in a larger group of people. And in that larger group, we can have different study sites. For example, if, we have in Kenya, and this is something that we have even with COVID-19, there's the COVID vaccine accelerator and all. Trials are being done in different countries at the same time, because we feel like these are drugs that might show efficacy. And if we'll just localize it to a single hospital, there's that chance of me as a doctor, as a human being, have a tendency to believe in one drug. So any report that comes, I'll see the positive outcomes of that treatment. What if it doesn't have that much benefit? So it's a randomized, controlled trial where the drug is released to different study sites. It's being used by different people. Reports are being compiled from them in terms of the outcomes of management. And then this is brought back to a central tally point to determine whether it's showing benefits and the benefits outweigh the risks involved. Up to 5,000 patients. And in that case, that drug, the clinician administering doesn't know it's not the ideal drug that was used, or if it has to be a randomized control. That is the context, that both the patient and the doctor doesn't know that that is the drug that is being used in the patient. It's a trial drug. so that there's no bias, because there are certain situations where, because you feel like you're being given the right drug, you'll feel better because psychologically you are wired to feel good about it, the placebo effect. But in this case, it's a randomized trial being used on patient, and even the doctor doesn't know what is being used, and improves the quality of outcomes of that study to show that there's no bias or any kind of malice involved in that study. So that's a very, very important component as well in the phase 3 trial. So it's confirmatory, we confirm the efficacy, safety profiles are determined, and we use another benefit of phase 3 trial because we are using different sites, and that is where now the COVID-19 is coming in. We're talking about testing it in Africans. Any drug that is being used in a particular population of people, even paracetamol that we are using now when we have headaches and any form of pain, it has to be proven that it has efficacy in treating me and treating you in African or Kenyan context. If it's not able to treat us, then it shouldn't be in our market. And that is why now in the first 3 trials, it can be used in different study sites, and being used in different study sites, the evidence shows that it can work in blacks, it can work in the Asians, it can work in the whites, and that is diverse. That diversity justifies the ability to treat people because there are certain conditions that affect anyone and everyone at the same time, like COVID-19 now. So that need to have the trial conducted in different sites to prove efficacy. That is critical. Then after the phase 3 now, the drug is approved and it's available for use. It will be released in the market. But after that, any drug that is in the market is a trial drug because it has been used, and everybody, we are different. Our way of reacting to a drug or responding to it differ. And therefore, somebody will have a side effect that is very severe with the one drug, and another person will not even manifest any side effect. And some people will get better, some people will not get better. So in that case, that is now the phase 4 clinical trials where we are using them because it has shown benefits and is treating people based on the trials that were done. But in case of any side effects that are determined, we have to report. Any failure to treat an individual in a condition where we feel it should treat, we should report that and have it documented. And that is normally done by the doctors in their practice and all. Pharmacists, any healthcare worker who is in a clinical practice should be able to document that. And then on the same note, there are certain drugs that are recommended. For example, now you find a drug has been recommended for treating malaria. And then from evidence of use, we realize that it has ability to treat another condition. It was recommended for malaria, but now it's treating, let's say, typhoid. So that means another indication is being found for that drug. And that is for part of the research because it's improving our scientific knowledge and improving access to care because it might be treating a disease that we didn't know. And even now, that is another phase that we have in azithromycin, dexamethasone, all these drugs that are being flaunted as potential cures for COVID-19, they have been in the market for over 30 years. And being they've been in the market for over 30 years, they've been used in managing other alternative disease states. However, now with COVID-19, they are being tried. It's a trial because there's no evidence that they've been used in treating COVID-19, but we are hoping because of their mechanism of action and the way they make patients respond to them, they can help improve the symptoms of the patients. So that is a form of a trial. And that is why we need to adopt it. So those are the 4 phases of the clinical trials. And that is looking at it from the benefits of what we can do about clinical trials and how we can derive value from them. So with that said, what is our role in medical research and clinical trials, to be specific for today? We all have a role in clinical trials. We all have a role in medical research. And our role in all these spaces revolves around looking at it in terms of why do we want to improve access to medical knowledge? The person who is sick today, the person who is suffering from a particular disease, is somebody related to you, or if not related to you, you have a risk that somebody might be closer to you can get affected. And you have ability to enable that person suffering to get access to care. So if you can be part of a trial that enables them get the quality care, why not be part of it? Selflessness, we give to those who need our services and our help, even when they are not able to compensate us, or there's nothing specifically aligned to enabling us get better care. And in a way, it's a matter of helping ourselves as well. If this happens, then you have a chance that at one point in time, you'll be able to access the services. So if you're able to access the services, probably let's say for example, COVID-19 when it started, some people were not able to access the quality care, but now they're able to get the care they need. And if they're able to get the care they need, that's a win. And now let's say even for the next how many months, next 1 year, COVID still exists, and you took part in a clinical trial and a drug was managed to obtain, then that person will get care because of you. If you get sick and somebody took part in a clinical trial and a drug is already in the pipeline, you'll get cured because somebody made the initial step to ensure there's a cure. That is one reason as to why you need to be part of them. Two, by being part of a clinical trial, you are helping in terms of improving the scientific knowledge and you're giving back to the society, one. Two, you are contributing to yourself by being a person who drives the health agenda as it should be driven. And how do you become part of these clinical trials? Being part of a clinical trial, some of them occur in the communities. Like, for example, surveys are being done about use of a particular drug, any adverse events that you normally find, you need to report that, just a survey. You have focus group discussions. I talked about clinical studies can be intervention or observation. But now we have post-exposure prophylaxis for people who are having HIV/AIDS. The drugs are being given for anybody who has been at risk of contracting HIV/AIDS. Are they using it? Are they not using it? And why are they not using them? And if that is the case, then we have a responsibility to observe that and report it. When you report that kind of an outcome, you're improving access to care. Two, if, for example, now with COVID-19, you feel like there's been stigma around COVID-19 and you don't feel like anybody within your close vicinity who might be sick needs to be in a hospital where they're being given these drugs. You're denying them an access chance to get quality care. It might not be the right cure, but they can be the people who can start being given another treatment plan. And that treatment plan might work for them. And when it works for them, it ensures that we have another cure line. That is for the patients who need it. That will be a win, encouraging people to be enrolled. And other than that, the benefits that come with being part of a clinical trial, you are the first person that is part of a study on a particular drug. You are in kind of a way, you are among the pioneers in that field. You're helping improve knowledge, you're helping get the right care, and you're helping the society get better management. Two, there are different consultations that are normally had. You find a clinical study needs to be done in a particular facility, there are no people enrolled. You can be part of the program because I've mentioned they have the 4 different categories. In clinical trial phase 1, you don't have to be sick. You can just be interested in being part of the study and supporting them. And in those cases, you find there are benefits that are accrued to you because in terms of insurance, you have a health insurance that is paid by the person because you are helping advance science and research. So the insurance that you are granted, some allowances might be there, some might not be. So it depends with the clinical trial that you're enrolled in. And at the basic core, you're improving access to care and advancing the field of science, which is very important. So field surveys, focus group discussions, the community observations that are there, you report them. You take part in the clinical trials. If, for example, a hospital or an institution is enlisting people to be subjects in a study, you willingly offer yourself to be able to advance that. And we've seen it in our society, even where we find like for people wanting to advance study of medicine, they offer their bodies. When they're dead, they decide that for them, they want to be buried, they want to be burnt or cremated. Instead, let their bodies be used in a medical school as a learning material for the students who are learning. And that is advancing science. That is improving access to knowledge and access to quality care, which is important. And the final bit, as I mentioned in the clinical phase, trial phase number 4, post-marketing surveillance, any adverse events, any problems, any extra effects that are felt, they need to be reported. Me and you have a role in reporting them. And that is in terms of the pharmacy line, we call that pharmacovigilance, where we do surveillance in the market for any drug that is in use, whether it has a side effect or a complication or an adverse drug reaction that is noted. That needs to be reported. Surveillance, reporting, and once it's reported, there is the investigation. Now there's analysis that can be done on it. There is further research that is done, whether it's effective or not effective. whether resistance is developing and everything. So this whole spectrum of care, from finding a molecule in the lab to the point where it's being used, and up to a point where it can be withdrawn from the market, it can exist in the market, confirm that it's treating that condition with no other complications or anything, but you have a role to be reporting, to be sharing information, and to be part of the streamline. And with that, I'm going to get into the point of COVID-19 trials that we're talking about in African context. Are they right or are they wrong? For me, I feel like they're right, we need to have them, but the only thing that we need to do is ensure we uphold ourselves to the highest standards of accountability and credibility by adhering to the Helsinki Declaration on good clinical practices and research. Once we abide by the good standards of practice, then there will be no risk of feeling like we're being used as guinea pigs. We need that research. Look at it in the context. All the drugs that are being recommended for use in our context are from developed countries. Which research has been done in African countries? Almost zero. And if any research is being done, we don't trust our own research as much because we feel like we are third grade or second stage level. We are playing second fiddle to everyone. Yet we have knowledgeable individuals who can do the research and improve access to care. That is one thing we have to acknowledge, and we have to support it by being part of the trials and enabling these people to identify solutions. The drugs that are being used, even when we're doing research with them in our context, it's research that is based on a suggestion by another person. So we are trying to confirm whether they are right or wrong. But what are we initiating? So if there's nothing that we are initiating and nothing that we're doing, then we are failing ourselves and we are blaming others for trying to help us solve our problem. So let's start by initiating the process, supporting the process and being part of it, and looking at how we can improve access to care for each other and for our entire community by advancing participation and improving our involvement in clinical trials and medical research. And it starts by being knowledgeable in terms of what it entails, how we can be part of it, and committedly and unconsciously, intentionally being part of the process. I think that will enable us to be better individuals and improve access to quality care, because everybody wants to live healthy. We can't live healthy when we can't access the quality products. We can't live healthy when we don't have empowered societies where people take it up to themselves to contribute to access to quality care. So thank you so much. Hezron, back to you.
Thank you so much, Dr. David, for that insightful session. I'm sure we've all learned something on medical research and our roles as individuals in that process. So I would like to invite the participants, both on Zoom and Facebook, to ask their questions. So you can raise your hand or just type on the chat box. So David, maybe I could ask something also concerning the COVID-19 vaccine, the way they are trying to accelerate the finding the vaccine for COVID-19.
Yes.
So what happens to the adverse reactions that might happen in the long term? Because right now I'm guessing they're looking at only the short-term adverse effects that might occur.
Yeah, so currently the process is to accelerate access to care, because what we look at is how many people are at risk of developing severe complications and dying from COVID-19. If we can prevent that, that's a win at this point. But in the same time, as we looked at it in terms of the different phases of clinical trials, a drug can enable you get better, but it can also have adverse drug events, side effects that are developing in you. So the intervention that is being put in place is that any patient that has been in a trial that has been treated by a particular cure, there's need for a database and a monitoring program. But we know, for example, if David was sick with COVID-19, he was given drug A, B, and C, he got better and is now out in the society. Is he feeling any complications? Is he finding any symptoms that are not normal to him? Then that should be reported. So it's a matter of having in place proper reporting mechanisms. And then beyond the reporting mechanisms, there's need for proper intervention, investigation measures. As I talked about pharmacovigilance, we looked at surveying to identify the problem one, we report that problem that has been identified, and then we investigate. If, for example, I'm developing long-term complications from treatment with COVID-19, then there should be a way to investigate and see, establishing causality. What made me get this complication? Was it the medicine? Was it the disease? And then if that is the case, how do we alleviate the symptoms or the complications of it? So it's a whole spectrum of the trial, but in the current phase, what I know is the focus is on solving the immediate short-term problems, and at the same time, putting in place resilient healthcare system that will ensure anybody who might develop complications in the long term, they can get the remedy they need. And that is what we should be even asking about as individuals, as citizens. How do we put that measure in place? Because once we know it should be done, then we should probe people like Pharmacy and Poisons Board, the Kenya Medical Research Institute. Like, they have a responsibility in that line. Do we drive that agenda with them? Because if we don't, it's our people. For example, the person who is sick might be your brother, your sister, your mom, your dad. And if you don't ask, they'll get severe complications. But it's because you had something in mind that could have helped put in place measures to sort the issue, but it's not being done. So that is something that we can engage in. I hope I've answered you, Hezron.
Yeah, thank you for that, David. Yeah, so far I'm not seeing any questions from the participants. Just there's Andrew who's saying thanks for the information.
You're welcome.
Yeah. So maybe you could just give the closing remarks, because I can't see any questions for now.
Okay, thank you. So what I would say is we all have a role in one. Medical research is important because any intervention we're dealing with human beings, it has to meet the needs of the society and our needs as individuals. There's no way we'll expect somebody to do research in another country and that research should treat me in Kenya, where I am. There's so much difference in terms of how we suffer, how we feel different things in our lives. So let's be, one, it's important. Two, let's be part of the research and let's drive it and accept it to be something integral to our systems rather than pushing it to others. That is one thing. Two, clinical trials, we can't get involved. They're not bad. They're for the well-being of ourselves and the people we interact with. So let's participate in them. Let's seek information where we are. And in case of anything, the most important bit at this point in time, because I know all of us are using medicines. And if you all are using medicines and anyone at one point in time, there's any adverse events that you might find, report that to your healthcare facility, to your pharmacist, to your doctor. Let it be documented so that we advance access to local knowledge. Because when we don't report, there's not available knowledge in our case. So if that is not happening, we are feeling it. And in that aspect of reporting any adverse events that we have, in these facilities, even for the healthcare workers who are in this room, I see that we have Dr. Angela Kariuki. We have from the Pharmacy and Poisons Board, there's the yellow form and the pink form. These are forms for reporting adverse drug events. If someone brings a complaint, document it, whether it looks legitimate or not. You're not that patient, you don't feel it, but the patient does. So as a patient, as an individual, let's report to the facility. The facility needs to document and second, forward it to the Pharmacy and Poisons Board. Then from there, let's ramp up advocacy for investigations to be initiated in ensuring we determine the root cause for such adverse events and correct them so that anything that happens must be addressed. And when we do that, it will be a win for us. Because we find some of these complications are becoming because we have poor quality products in the market, drugs that are counterfeit or substandard, they are fake drugs. But if you don't report, nobody will ever know they are fake drugs in the market. But if you report and we follow up and determine and know there's a fake drug that is in the market, then that ensures the next person who might have bought the same drug and developed the same complication doesn't. You did the part that you are supposed to play. So let's document. However little the discomfort you're feeling from using that drug, that little discomfort might be because of your advantage as a person. Somebody will develop severe complications of the same nature, but you can't stop it. So why not stop it? So those are very important things. And I hope the session that we've had is insightful to you. It makes you realize that we have a role. It makes us take responsibility for our healthcare. And if we're going to do it, then it will be a win for everyone. And I hope that serves as well. Asanteni sana. Back to you, Hezron.
Thank you so much, David. And I'd also like to say thank you to the participants who have been able to join us today for making their time to join us. And also for those who have joined us on Facebook, thank you so much. So this webinar is being recorded and it will be shared on the Reculture YouTube page. So I'd like to end the session now, and next week we are going to have a different topic, and you're all welcome to join us. So thank you so much and have a good week ahead of you.
Thank you so much, Hezron. It's been a pleasure. And asanteni kila mtu for joining in